Monday, another long Monday. I had a crazy long Monday, and then I was thinking I'm going to end it talking to amazing people, talking to our Pacific Islander community. So, real brief, what is Koviki Talk? Koviki Talk is a multi-episode series that talks about all things COVID-19, but we do it from the Pacific Islander perspective. So, the examples we always give is when it was time to register for the census. We talked to our Pacific Islander community about doing that safely. When it was time to vote, we talked about voting in a pandemic. When it was time to get tested, we talked about that, talked about where we could do that. And now things are, everything's about the vaccine. So we are talking about the vaccine. We are having people on the show. So it's Pacific Islanders speaking to Pacific Islanders about COVID-19. And our first amazing person that we have on our show today is, let's see, Naki. You've switched it around. Go ahead.
I know, because I was going to introduce Brandon, but I didn't want to mess up all the words. I'm very simple. Trina Sound resides on the indigenous lands of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde in Portland, Oregon. She shares ancestral lineage from the village of Pina in Weno, Chuk, and the outer island of Lucanor in the Mortlocks of FSM. As a returning student, she's currently on a journey to restore the collectivist values of her Chukese heritage while navigating higher education. Her goal is to become a therapist for the Pacifica community. She's known for uplifting and encouraging those around her without demanding attention for it, and has a thirst for knowledge and making sense of the world. Welcome to Koviki Talk, Trina.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here with y'all.
Yay.
So this is the good thing about being the CEO and the founder of Pacifica by Design. You can switch at the last second. You can switch the bios. So that, even if I've prepared, now I get to switch. And I see Brandon Tacadena was born and raised on the island of Oahu in the town of Mililani. So when I lived in Mililani, they had just opened Waikele Shopping Center, and that was a big deal. That was a big deal when I was there. And actually, Kmart was opening a Kmart on Oahu was a big deal at that time. Kmarts were way different than they were in the mainland. When I was in the mainland, Kmarts were I don't know. They were just looked down upon. They were cleaner. They were bigger. They were just a bit different experience when I moved to Oahu. So I got love for Mililani. Brandon has genealogical ties to Samoa, Tokelau, the Philippines, and various parts of Europe. Raised in a faith-rooted household and fortified by the prayers of a resilient single mother, Brandon discerned a vocational call early in his life. He pursued that call, earning a BA in Bible and Christian Ministries from the Pacific Rim Christian University and an MDiv in Systemic Theology and Social Ethics from Union Theological Seminary in the city of New York. His interests explore the intersections of Pacifica identity and indigeneity, theology, justice, decolonial praxis, and spiritual fluidity. I'm going to get you, Naki. Brandon's background includes social justice and advocacy, organizing hospital, chaplaincy, and diversity, equity, and the inclusion reform in higher education. He currently works for the Pacific Islander Community Association of Washington, our good friends at Pikawa, as the Leadership and Spirituality Programs Manager. Brandon oversees the Oceania Leadership Institute, OLI, which is Pikawa's virtual leadership program committed to offering culturally rooted leadership training. Brandon also co-manages Pikawa's Sovereignty Farm with the Pacifica Wayfinders. Outside of Pikawa, he is an associate educator for the digital platform Talanoa, as well as a co-host of the podcast Sawatakin. In his spare time, Brandon gardens, enjoys talking story with folks, and loves sharing meals. Welcome, Brandon.
Yay!
Thank you. So grateful to be here. Thank you so much.
Well, it's we skipped a week, so we actually had gone a Monday without talking to people about COVID-19 and where we're at and all the things that our people are doing. So it's so good to be back. Naki's got an icebreaker question for us. I just got a peek at that. That's going to be fun. Go ahead, Naki.
Okay, so I had two, but I one or the other, but this one is really good. Would you rather travel back in time to meet your ancestors or to the future to meet your descendants? Ha ha.
Brandon, go first.
That's a hard one. That's a hard one.
Who you picking, Neki?
I'll go with Brandon. And we have Mr. Pikawa tuning in. That's Joseph.
Yeah, I think my journey is still developing, and so with that, I'd be kind of afraid to go to the future and see who comes from my own lineages. I think that'd be cool, but if I had to choose, I'd probably go backwards and meet some ancestors. I think a lot of times, we have this imagination of like who our ancestors were, but it'd be really cool to like sit down with them and actually learn and listen to the stories that shaped their lives. And so, yeah, I definitely go back and meet my ancestors.
Awesome. What about you, Trina?
I actually was going to have the same answer. I would be very interested in meeting my ancestors. I think right now I'm like in the thick of learning who I am and my identity. And I think being able to like have fuller access to stories live in real time would be like a dream come true. So being able to do that would be amazing.
Thank you. What about you, Carl?
I am 100% go back and meet my ancestors. I think I'm my 6th weekend in a row spending it with an elder. We started the Elder series together. I am just fascinated by history and culture. And so I looked at that question and was like, well, that's not a tough one for me. I would love to, see into the future. I don't know that I would understand everything that's going on in the future, but to definitely go back and talk to ancestors would be my choice. Great question, Neki.
Yeah, I thought that I would want to. I would love to go back and talk to my ancestors, but I also would like to go and meet my descendants because of all the amazing work. Like we always talk about every week that it's a great time to be a Pacific Islander because it's the work that you guys are all doing. And I would love to see how my descendants are profiting or not. But I really believe that Pacific Islanders in the future, like, we're going to be doing crazy, amazing work. And a lot of it is coming out of the Pacific Northwest with Pikawa and OPIC and Utopia PDX and all the great work. So I would love to go to the future and see how my great-great-grandkids or our great-great-grandkids or family are really, what are they getting and what are they doing with all the work that is happening now? So I would go to the future. So
That's a really good point. And after listening to that, then now I'm, but just looking at it originally, I was like, oh, definitely this. Kind of on that note, and Naki and I have only been in community work recently in the last 5 or 6 years.
Right.
So we're really new to that genre. But it seems like in the short time we've been in community work, it doesn't seem like there's been a better time to be a Pacific Islander in terms of gaining our own identity, gaining some stewardship and where our ship goes, writing our own story, doing all these things. It just seems like a really good time and kind of something that we're beginning to emerge or not just survive, but begin to point our direction, point our boats in that direction of thriving. And I wanted to get Brandon and Trina's thoughts on that because, like I said, Naki and I are short term in this. It seems like the greatest time for us, but we've been in the game for 5 or 6 years. Do you get that feeling that the identity and the separation and individuality of Pacific Islanders? Do you get that feeling as well? We'll start with Trina.
Oh, wow. That's such a loaded question. But I also kind of share sentiments with you and Naki, Carl. Like, I feel new to this space as well. But just from like an from a perspective of just like seeing what has happened over the last decade, it's really evident like there's been work that's been done to like push for our community to be seen and heard and also valued for the things that we do outside of like the sports or the sports
Yeah.
and like the arts. And so I've been really like blessed and fortunate to like feel like I've been in community with people like Brandon and Joseph just in a short period of time, and seeing like the work that so many talented people are doing. And it feels like fairly new space. Like I don't feel like I recognize or remember organizations that existed a decade ago, and if they did, I didn't know about them. So I feel like there's a lot of traction right now.
Yeah.
What about you, Brandon?
Yeah, similarly, I think most of I just came out of school, so most of my time was in school, but I was imagining what community work could look like, what an experience, and I definitely romanticized it. In the 2 months that I've been here, I've been able to learn and grow at Pikawa. And under the leadership of Joseph Zia, like there's just been so much growth for me. But I also want to just acknowledge the work that leaders like Joseph and other folks in our community have put in to create these pathways for us to lead, right? To model leadership. Really, it's the labor of those folks. And I always want to like uplift and elevate them as well, because they need to be honored for the work that they put in that we didn't know about, the work that was happening behind the scenes, and building up leaders and building up programs like Pika, organizations like Pika or like Utopia. So definitely want to give them their flowers.
Yeah, we definitely stand on the shoulders of giants that came before us. And if we are in that period that I'm seeing it in the way that I see it, it is definitely because of the work of the people that came before us, without a doubt. Um, it is nice to see, the emergence of a national organization, or something that, an entity that can communicate directly with the government in terms of having our own identity. Um, in your current role, do you see um, that the realization of all of the things that came before you? And I know that you both have different roles, but in what you're doing today, it's kind of that what Naki had asked, like the ancestors of people that came before us. Do you see that kind of lineage in the work that you do today, in the role that you're in? And we'll start with Brandon.
Yeah, I mean, most definitely. I know we're going to go into it a little bit more, but when I'm invited to speak about OLI, I always talk about the genealogy of OLI, right? And so I was brought into Pika, I want to say about 3 months ago. I was approached by Joseph Cia, and he had pitched this idea of the Oceania Leadership Institute, which is an educational arm of Pikawa. And so when I share with folks, I always make sure that like people know that there was a genealogy behind it, and there were elders and leaders who were praying for it, who were speaking into existence, who were doing the labor of building it up, and really making it available for us to do that. And so I want to elevate Dr. Nia Oto, Jake Vitisimanu, Joseph Cia, of course, Pastor Lena Thompson, Miriam Tarian, Sili Savusa. There were just these giants who were seeing the need that was happening in the community, and were like, we need something in place to be able to allow young folks, leaders, to come and be equipped, come to be in community, and then also just to be able to be commissioned out to do the work that our community is so desperately in need of. So definitely want to acknowledge that there is a lineage there.
Yeah, definitely. So with OLI, and it's coming out of, like you said, an arm of Pikawa. What are you doing in OLI that is that why it started? And I know you touched a little bit on it, but let's get into it.
Yeah. So I mean, Pika is relatively new, right? I think it's less than about 2 years old. And the beautiful thing about being a part of this organization is to learn the histories of what happened and how it was created. And so, from my perspective, it sounds like Pika hit the ground running.
Yeah.
They quickly got involved with the work of COVID response, and in that work, there was just a lot of folks who came to Pika, to the organization, from different disciplines, different fields, and they were asking, how can I help my community? Really kind of echoing this understanding that they weren't that they weren't empowered enough to go do the work themselves, that they needed to be behind some type of like institution or backing or whatnot. And so that was kind of one of the pillars that Joseph had shared with me, where that was a realization that like something needed to shift. And so with OLI, again, I was the new kid on the block. I was still out living in Hawaii when Joseph approached me, and I spent like a good 2 months just talking with the elders, right? So had a meeting with Dr. Nia, had a meeting with Jacob, had a meeting with Lena, Pastor Lena, and really trying to understand where was the need, what were they envisioning for the program, what was the values that they were willing to instill into folks. And so, through those conversations, through those Tononoa, was able to come together, able to build a curriculum together. And then that's kind of how OLI came to be. But I also want to acknowledge that it wasn't a me thing.
Yeah.
I was just somebody who came along and was already building upon the frameworks that other folks were already doing and the work that they were doing.
That's awesome. And so, Trina, what week are you on with OLI?
I have my fancy
Oh,
program packet. Let me show you. Okay, it's August. I want to say we're in week. It's kind of hard to count because technically we started beginning of July and we're meeting the first and third weeks of the month.
awesome.
So technically I would say it's week 4, but we also have like optional Talanoa sessions in between to help guide conversations and build community with one another.
Yeah.
But I would say like officially it's been like we're week 4 of class.
And it's done virtually, so, right? Because, COVID pandemic. How are you guys coping with having everything done virtually? And which I think with the pandemic, and we're doing a lot of stuff virtually, that we're reaching people and having people in these groups that normally they can't drive to what, you know what I mean, to Washington to have it. So like Leah Boasa, who is with PBD, like has joined OLI, and she wouldn't have been able to join it had it been, in person.
Yeah.
Or are you finding it a lot? I mean, I think it's a lot better, has been a lot better, and a lot of stuff, great, amazing things have come out of the pandemic. Is everyone in OLI? Are they in the Pacific Northwest, or what are you finding, Brandon?
Yeah, those are good questions, Naki. Thank you for asking that. So it is international. Well, it's national. We have folks coming from Washington, from Oregon, from California. We have folks out in Texas. We have folks in Montana. Really a wide net. We also have someone from American Samoa who's joining in at the early hours of the morning. So shout out to Husu. Yeah, I think, it's been a really beautiful process to be in journeying with these folks. A part of the process that I kind of make sure that they understand is that it's about reflection, right? So when we engage content, when we read readers from Pacifica authors, poets, it's important to be in process and I want to know what you're thinking about when you engage the material. And a lot of folks, I think the majority of our cohort is in diaspora, right? And so there's these themes of that I see reoccurring in their writing and in their shares in class about not feeling disconnected from the culture, feeling disconnected from the land, not feeling like they're enough. And then on top of like all of those things, we're talking about structural issues, right? So we're talking about racism, we're talking about white supremacy. And then of course there's other stuff in terms of like mental health. And so there's just all of these things that are coming up, but I see the benefit of OLI being online that I've heard from multiple cohort members is that, there's a community here that didn't exist for them before. One of our cohort members, Kathy Weber Bates, really amazing human, based out there in Montana. And I love the way that she reflects on the program and like how it's inspiring her to do the work that she's doing out there in Montana, but then also for her culture. And so That was a side tangent, but yeah, it's. I think OLI, the Oceania Leadership Institute, has been creating a space and a community for folks that they wouldn't have otherwise had access to before.
Yeah, and I think also the awesome thing that is coming out now, and which is a great. You always say it's a great time to be a Pacific Islander right now. Is that when I was growing up, the only history that I was learning was, colonists and we're celebrating Christopher Columbus discovering America. Like what? So totally not. Now, I think the amazing thing is that our kids are learning, their own history, like, the truth about, King Kamehameha and learning about, Captain Cook and learn like the real history, right? And breaking down what it means to be Pacific Islander and how the ocean really is connecting us where they've separated the definition of a lot of people is that the ocean divides us, like, Hawaii is over here and the Chukis colony is over here and Samoa is over here. Well, really the ocean has really brought us together and we're doing a lot of work together. It's not just Samoans are doing this and Tonggans are doing this. And it's like, I really believe that the pandemic has brought all of us together. Pacific Islanders. Hey, look, we're here, we're there. We're not just, and we always stress this too, that we're not just athletes and we're not just actors, which is awesome, but we're educators, we're community leaders, we're teachers, we're poets, we're artists. So I love that in this time that we're starting to see our faces. People are seeing our faces in different, communities, different things. I guess what I'm saying is, what has the pandemic, Trina, what has it brought out for you? Or has it brought anything out for you?
Oh, the pandemic hit me at a very interesting time because I, prior to the pandemic, was working in the service industry. And so, along with, thousands of other people, I was laid off for a few months. And in that time, like, it was a lot of self-reflection, but also I was dealing with a lot of, not a lot, but I was dealing with my own, like, mental health issues as well. And through that, like, it really brought up a lot of kind of just things that I wanted to value going forward, or things that I maybe value that I haven't been participating in. And a lot of that came with, like, okay, I really want to then like try and finish school, because historically I have been someone who just kind of navigated my way around life, but not really felt myself grounded in anything that felt like valuable to who I am, or what I'm about. And so through that process, like, it helped me connect with someone at this community college that I work with, my now boss slash like lead mentor, Macarusa Protasano. And
Mhm.
so through that, like, I through that relationship got connected with organizations like Pacific Climate Warriors, and connected with this community of people who exist in Washington, Pikawa leaders, and the community, as well as Utopia Washington and Utopia of Oregon. And so, yeah, the pandemic has given like a mixture of things, but I think overall, I think that I was able to come out with like a net positive, because so many of these amazing relationships were an outcome of all of those transitions that took place.
Yeah.
So I definitely feel privileged, but I know that, like, that's not everyone's story. So I also understand that, there was a lot of loss, a lot
Yeah.
of lives that were lost,
Oh my gosh.
and continue to this day. So yeah, it's mixed, but I feel blessed.
Yeah. Yeah. Brandon, how about you?
Yeah, I was thinking about the question as you asked it. Prior to COVID, so I think the earliest like murmurs of COVID-19 happened in December of 2019, if I'm not correct.
Mhm.
But prior to that, in September of 2019, I had just lost my brother, my younger brother, in a
Sorry.
very, yeah, thank you, thank you. I had lost him in a very tragic, unexpected way, and I think that kind of initiated just this season of like grief and lament, which is, it's weird that it coincided with, COVID and what was happening in terms of just the amount of people that were dying. And I think because I was already kind of conditioned, or I already entered into that season, it made it more apparent to me just like the need for healing. I think a lot of folks, even in my work as like a hospital chaplain, right, like working with grief, I think COVID presented a very difficult situation for most families in terms of like, dealing with this abruptness of like losing family members, figuring out how to cover costs for funerals, not truly being able to grieve in the ways that they were, they originally would if the circumstances were different, right? Like families couldn't go to funerals, or there was a limitation, or, so for me, as someone who like studies theology, and as someone who, did hospital chaplaincy work, I was just really cognizant of like, how are we assisting, how are we helping our communities grieve? And what does grieving well look like in the midst of COVID-19, in the midst of the pandemic? And so that was kind of like, for me, what COVID was doing. But on top of that, I think, similar situations with other folks, right? So job security. I just finished my program at Union, and there wasn't really many opportunities for me. I was working at a Bible college back in Hawaii. I was helping out with their diversity, equity, and inclusion task force. But really, it wasn't in terms of like paying back these loans. It wasn't really doing anything. And so I am definitely grateful to Joseph Saia of Pikawa for just being able to like extend an amazing opportunity to do work that I've always wanted to do, and work that I went to school knowing that I wanted to do. And then aside from that, I think the one thing that came out of COVID that was really beautiful was that as a way to like grieve my brother, and also as a way to like connect with land, I started gardening. I started a garden practice. Yeah. And so I started growing kalo. I would connect I would connect with my Kanaka Maoli friends, and different mahi'ai, different farmers, and like go to Hawaii and just learn and stuff. And so definitely planted a lot of kalo, a lot of sweet potatoes, uala, definitely a lot of, I tried eggplants, which was really fun, but really it was a beautiful kind of spiritual practice of just like reconnecting with the earth, getting my fingernails dirty. And then now it translates to here at Pika and the work with our sovereignty farm with the Wayfinders. And so
I think you just became Naki's best friend when she heard kalo.
I love kalo, and just not to throw off the subject, but I love to eat, obviously, but kalo is like my favorite, PI food, just because it's not touched, right? I mean, we cook it as is. You don't need to add seasoning to it. You just, and you have to really have a taste for it, but I love kalo. So
we always joke on our other show of how long it takes us to get to talk about food. And when it's our own show and it's not Koviki Talk, it takes us about 5 minutes to get to it. It took us 30 in Koviki Talk to get to talk about food. But I just heard kalo. I saw Naki's eyes light up. Trina, in I think in your bio, it had talked about becoming a therapist. And I think that mental health for Pacific Islanders for a long time has been a taboo topic. Like, it's been something that we just don't talk about. And because of a lot of the, cultural issues, it's probably more important for Pacific Islanders to talk about it, but it just hasn't been on the table, so to speak. Are you seeing an emergence and again, Naki and I talk about this, it seems like it's still a taboo topic overall, but there's beginning to be pockets of, where, we create a safe space and we just talk about things that we should talk about. And it seems to be gaining a foothold and gaining momentum. Do you see that from your perspective, that it's beginning to open up to be not so much of a taboo topic with some people?
Yeah, I do feel like there's been a cultural shift, or at least from my perspective, where it is a little bit easier to talk more openly about it without feeling like it needs to be skirted away or like minimized to like another time. So I'm definitely hopeful for that, and for our communities to be able to like actually be able to talk about these things more openly and not feel, self-conscious about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think those are things that, again, when I say they're probably more needed. Would be an example would be COVID. COVID hit Pacific Islanders harder than it hit other groups. So, from a mental wellness and health and well being standpoint, we probably need to talk about being stressed even more than other groups, because we're more likely to have friends or family that are affected, or ourselves, and not being able to have that outlet. Um, you know, it just seems like it's becoming more of, and it could be because Leah's part of PBD and her husband is a clinical psychiatrist. I mean, and we're just more tuned into it, but it does seem to be kind of making its way into more the mainstream PI part, where it's becoming a topic that we can talk about. So definitely appreciate you looking at that as being, one of your goals, and helping the community that way. Um, Brandon, those are so your role as a spiritual manager for a CBO. Like, we deal with CBOs all the time. We do, we've gone to events, we've gone to meetings, we've done all these kind of things. I've not seen that from a CBO. I've seen spiritual work, and I've seen programs, but I haven't seen an actual program manager for that aspect. Um, is this a role that you ever saw yourself in when you went to, your theological school, and those kind of things, or was this something that, kind of you approached you later on?
Yeah, it's a good question, Carl. I didn't see myself in this role. If I can be honest, this is like the ideal job. Initially, before my brother had passed, I had every intention of applying for PhD and going down the academy route. But I think after that, there's a lot of like healing that I had to do for myself. And so that's why I chose to go home to Hawaii, and I was with my family. But really, and again, like, I just can't express my gratitude enough to Joseph CEO for creating this position for me. And so in terms of my responsibilities here at Pikawa, so I would describe it as kind of like an on-site chaplain. I'm also right now working towards the ordination process with Pastor Lena through the Presbyterian Church, BC USA. And so she's been mentoring me and helping me along with that process. But I, you know, it's an interesting conversation to have with folks, and we could have this conversation like literally for hours. But there's this, as Pacific Islanders, we can't not acknowledge the proximity that we have to Christianity, right? Um, a lot of our families are Christians, right? A lot of our families adhere to these belief systems. And I fully acknowledge and affirm that, folks have had terrible experiences with the church. Folks have had traumatic experiences, and I don't want to downplay that. Like, I think the church has done some harm. But, when we look at the landscape of organizing and activism, the churches still have some power, right? And some pastors. And not just that, but we also have to give honor to our elders who are still practicing and still praying for us, right? For myself, I always credit my mom, right? I think there were points where, I've wrestled with my own faith, and there were times where I wanted to walk away, but I just come back to the moments where she would pray, and she would, like, pray for me to be successful, or pray for me to be in these places, pray for me to have good health. And that's one of the reasons why I haven't like totally just like pieced out of religion.
Yeah.
But in terms of my responsibilities here at Pika, it's really I tend to look at spirituality in a very fluid way. I'm very accepting, open towards folks and I encourage folks to integrate their indigeneity into their spiritual practices, right? Because before we were Christian, we practiced our own indigenous spirituality. And, like, I think a lot of folks, a lot of Pacific Islanders, they still practice that indigenous spirituality. It's just beneath this, it's layered beneath our Christian practices, right? And so my curiosity, my interest has always been to uncover that, to develop theology, what we believe about God that fits our communities. And so Here's what I found. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Part of the work of my Siri wants to jump in, obviously. Up in here. But part of my work here is to help folks to navigate that, right? And so, under this system of white supremacy, right, religion falls within that category, and we can look at the history of colonization and how Christianity played a role in that too. But a lot of our folks are still Christian; they're still practicing, and so how do we build consciousness around what we believe about God? How do we dismantle and take away the whiteness of God, right? A lot of people will think of Jesus or God as like this blonde hair, blue eyed person, but it's like, actually, he was a Palestinian Jew, like first century Palestinian Jew. He was brown. He looked like us. And so, yeah, like one of the traditions that I was trained under at Union was liberation theologies. And at the core of liberation theology is this understanding that God is always on the side of the oppressed. God is always advocating for those who have been downtrodden, who are under the yoke of oppression from empire. And I think that's something that a lot of our churches don't realize or don't like play to. And I think that's a very important message, especially being a part of an organization like PICA, where I would say in my interactions, we're not faith-based, but we are faith-rooted. I think a lot of our members are practicing Christians, and that spirituality plays a role in how we choose to advocate for our communities. And so it's really about nourishing the people here, but also creating spaces for the communities, establishing collaborations with other churches. It's really multifaceted in what I do here at PICA, but one of the ways is through the Oceania Leadership Institute, and then a new program that we're launching this week is Sacred Oceania, which I'm really excited about. So,
yeah, I think we always talk about that we're going to look to certain groups for leadership, and it's going to be spiritual leaders, it's going to be CBOs, it's going to be elders, you know what I mean. But that, as I was reading your bio for the first time, as I was announcing you, and dealing with words like indigeneity, it did strike me that why aren't there more CBOs with somebody in your capacity? Because it is such a big piece of our culture.
Right.
Our faith is such a big piece of our culture that it did strike me as like, this seems to make sense, even though I'd never seen it before. So I was really interested in what your role is and what you do there. That's awesome. Let's talk about the vaccine. So there's all kinds of, are we going to do boosters? Some governmental agencies are making it mandatory. There's still hesitancy out there. Talk a little bit about how you're navigating that in your role with our people, because there's so much misinformation out there. There's so much half good information, like that's good information, but there's a whole back end to what you're talking about. I mean, it just seems like there can be, because digital information comes so quickly in so many different forms, that there's confusion out there about, what we should be doing at this point. And I'm not saying like what we should be doing from, an advice standpoint necessarily, if that's what you want to talk about, but it's kind of, how are you navigating those kind of conversations? How are you navigating this topic in your role today? Because I think that's a big thing right now is the vaccine, the hesitancy. If there's hesitancy, let's talk about it, those kind of things. So I'll throw that to Trina.
That's such a heavy question. First of all, I am not a medical expert. I am a community member, but I think just being a member of the community and acknowledging, like, there are, of course, like real hesitations and fears surrounding just navigating a pandemic. We've never done this before in our lifetimes. So I think like acknowledging the fear is definitely a big one. And I think being able to like validate those parts of us when we are in conversations, or at least when I'm in conversations with, family members or just like people in the community that I talk to, I feel like that's super important. But also just recognizing like people have agency and to be able to choose for themselves, regardless of whether or not, they decide to. But I'm fully vaccinated, and I hope that others see value in that as well. But yeah, I think definitely just being able to acknowledge that fear element is super important because it's real. I felt it too. I still feel it.
Yeah. Right. And I think those are, those are the conversations that are out there. There's all kinds of different, there's not like just two sides to it. There's a whole bunch of different, positions on it. I think that, navigating those, having your own beliefs, but being able to hold space in a conversation, it can be difficult. It's not some you talk to some people, it's political. You talk to other people, it's medical, 14 different ways that it's being held. Brandon, from your side, looking at it from a spiritual standpoint, how do you handle those conversations?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Trina would agree with this, right? Like anytime I think I enter in a conversation with someone and there's like an opposing view or something that I necessarily wouldn't agree with, I think the first thing that I clock is, what's the thing behind the thing? Like what's motivating you? What is, if is it fear, right? Is it a concern? Is it distrust? Like I think it's a case by case, and I think it's very contextual, right? To have conversations with folks. But I would agree with what Trina had said, right? I think, in our world right now, right, there's just a lot going on. I'm thinking specifically about like, the report that just came in about the climate, right, and what's happening. I'm thinking about, within the span of COVID, right, I'm thinking about the George Floyd incident happened, and like thinking about people organizing around Black Lives Matter. There's a lot of these factors that are happening, right, and I think people are confronted with this existential question of like, what is going on and what is my life, like what am I doing, and it's hard. It's really hard to navigate, especially if you are in isolation, if you're quarantined and you haven't had much connection or capacity to connect with people outside of your own house. And so with me, I think one, I'm going to acknowledge the medical professionals, the people who have dedicated their lives to medicine and who know what they're talking about. I'm definitely going to follow their position and their authority of what they're saying. But also, I think it's important, like Trina said, to validate the concerns that people have. I think it's important to acknowledge some of the fears and concerns that they're talking about, but also reiterating and pointing them back to the professionals. And so that's why it's important that our community has faces and people like Dr. Nia or Dr. Samoa, right? There are healthcare professionals who look like us who are telling us we need to get the vaccine, like we need to wear masks. And they know at a policy level and also statistically, like how many of our community have been suffering because of COVID. And so I always point them in that direction. But in terms of my role, it's more of just listening, right? Listening, acknowledging, not necessarily trying to like pick a fight or debate, but also just acknowledging that this is a concern that they have.
Yeah, I think it's I think you're right. It's just statistically our numbers have been so bad, throughout the pandemic. And Carl and I were having this conversation yesterday, is that I'm so fortunate that I can pick up a phone and call a policy person like Joseph has the data, and I can call Dr. Samoa and say, hey, what do you think of, the vaccine? Like, I am a fortunate person that I'm able to do that because of Koviki Talk, because of, we're putting the work in, like at Pikawa and OPIC and Utopia, and so many organizations. Samoan Community Development Center here in the Bay Area is has vaccination events and stuff like that. So I'm grateful that we get to do that. But because of Koviki Talk, we are able to reach Pacific Islanders that don't have that information, that don't have, Joseph's phone number, or can, go and knock on you guys' doors or pick up Trina, hey, Trina, what do you think of this? I think that all our community is so fortunate that we can reach out to the people. But I just want to go to the video that we were talking about. We're going to go to, and we'll have our producer play that video, Mena.
Today, Koviki got his COVID-19 vaccine. That's because everyone 12 and older is now eligible for a vaccine. Koviki then found a vaccine location for his sister. His sister sent an appointment link to her best friend, who reminded her business partner, who then, well, you get the idea. And it all started today with Koviki. Tomorrow, it can start with you. It's time to let our friends and family know that vaccines prevent nearly 100% of hospitalizations and deaths from COVID. We can do this.
Awesome. And that was in partnership with We Can Do This, a campaign run by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. For more information, please go to www.vaccine.gov. And I think we're kind of familiar with that because it's word of mouth and storytelling. And, Auntie, I went to go get the vaccine. I'm going to go with you, or I can help you get tested. I think a lot of the way we get to our community is word of mouth, and actually seeing our faces at these vaccine events, where if you need help and you see a familiar face, it puts you at ease to know, okay, there's someone that looks like me there. So I feel at ease. I'm going to ask them for help. Or, I think that a lot of it is seeing our faces at events where they may feel uncomfortable. So we thought we would play that. There you go. So OLI this is the first cohort. And so how long is it going to last?
So initially, Joseph and I and the planning team, when we organized it, we thought it was going to be 5 months. It's every first and third Saturday of the month. And then there's also spaces that are kind of designed in there every other Friday for us to have conversations if they're struggling with the content or they just want to talk story. So initially we set it for 5 months from July to December. But in the first couple of sessions that we had, we realized 5 months isn't enough for this group to coalesce and to be actually feel like they're in community. Yeah. And so we expanded it, and that's still kind of in the air right now. But we're thinking potentially having a retreat, COVID pending, to allow folks to come and meet in person and to be able to work together and hopefully organize around a project that's important to them. But yeah, so it's a year-long process.
Oh, that's very nice. That's very nice. And I love that mental health has come up. And I love that Trina is part of it, she's going to be a therapist. We speak it out into the universe because that's how we do. That's how we work. I 100% believe that you speak it out into the universe. You work hard and it happens. It's that easy. It really is that easy, working hard and saying it out loud. So there you go. So what is next for you, Trina?
What's next? It's finishing school. It's finishing the path that I started last fall. So that just looks like completing undergrad because I still have that to do, and then grad school. And hopefully be someone in the directory of many Pacifica faces that can provide culturally specific therapy as an option.
And everything is online for you?
Yes. Right now, school is online for fall, and then it's pending for the next terms.
Awesome. And Brandon, what's going on? And do you want to be, because of the classes that you've taken, are you looking to be a pastor or is that or not? I'm not. That's what I'm asking. That's why I'm asking.
I'm in the ordination process right now under Pastor Lena Thompson at Lake Burien Presbyterian. I think initially when I first started school, I think there was the thought that to be a pastor, but I'm just realizing there's so much more work that needs to be done structurally. And so definitely still considering going back to school to do a PhD. But in terms of what's next, I'm really, really excited about the programming that we're doing here at PICA. I'm really excited about the Sacred Oceania space that we're starting here for folks in Washington, in King County. We'll be hosting it on Wednesday evening, this coming Wednesday evening from 5:30 to 7:30. The Sacred Oceania space, again, is really continuing this work of developing a theology of spirituality that honors our indigeneity, but also acknowledges Christianity. And so in that space, we'll be meeting once a month. We're going to be doing some just critical work, looking at different texts, looking at the Bible, looking at different theologies, liberation theology, Black theology, queer theology. There's a whole realm of theology that exists that comes from the marginalized and people who are oppressed that I don't think a lot of folks have access to. And so really, I just want to be able to make that space available for folks and then just develop their own way of interacting and thinking about God, and how that kind of ties to this commitment to faith and justice.
And do you think now, and comparing to, I don't know, years ago, do you think it's more open to all the different, communities, like the cutie pie or different racial community? I mean, because before it was so reserved and so, not closed, but, particular to what community, and not to get, all crazy, but do you find it that it's more open now?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the communities that you're a part of, right? So I would say if you're part of a faith community that doesn't affirm your identity, if you're a cutie pie, maybe that's not the best place for you to be.
Right.
I do believe that God acknowledges who we are, and that takes into consideration of how He loves us. But I like to think that I'm one I'm one person alongside a group of other people, theologians, pastors, etc., who are kind of weaving together a theology that's healing, redemptive, decolonial, queer affirming, cutie pie affirming. We're doing that work together and collectively, and really, like, what I would love for the Sacred Oceania space to do is to help contribute that work in folks and help to kind of advance what other communities are already doing.
Awesome. Yeah, I was feeling that flow too, that we're starting, the religious forum is starting to loosen up and really realize that God loves everybody. Not, you know what I mean? It's not, he or she is not particular as to what group. So yay, I just need a confirmation of what I was thinking. Yay. So there you go. Carl?
That was a legitimate question. That was a question that wasn't scripted. That was as she was talking. Hey, wait a minute. I want to know about this. Are there any people that you want to give thanks to, shout out, so to speak, that's been along, somewhere along in your journey? I would, I would point this to Nani Wilson. As I'm thankful for Nani Wilson. She was facilitating a community-based organization event, and I attended that event, and I really never left after that. I mean, it's like I just was in community after that event. So I would say, thank you to Nani Wilson for helping put Journey to Empowerment into my path and my journey. And then, like I always say, I walked in that door and I walked into the community, and I've never left since. And that was 6 years ago. So I thank Nani for that. Is there anybody in not necessarily even in community work, just in your life journey at this point that you want to reach back to and say thank you to? And I'll give Brandon and Trina a second to talk to that. Think about that and point to Naki and see if there's anybody Naki has that she would point at and say, hey, thank you for those moments, or thank you for those minutes.
Ah, Jesus.
Thank you. Jesus is good.
Okay.
Always good.
Go to commercial. I would have to say, I was going to say Nani too, because she opened the door to my mental healing in a lot of things. That I was sexually abused when I was a child, not to get dreary, but I kept that inside. And she made it and told me that it's okay for me to talk about, because talking is healing. And so now you just can't shut me up. If I have a problem, I talk about it. Like, I have to get the words out. Otherwise, it sits inside of me and it affects the way that my relationship with people and the way that I am towards people. And me holding that in, it affected my relationships, the way that I handle my kids, the way, I was very overprotective. So yeah, I had to go with Nani too. But okay, talk about get deep, right? But it's right. But it really is. But if you hold it in, like I love that you're getting into mental health, and I love that we're making it normal for Pacific Islanders to seek mental health, especially during COVID. because we're home and we're quarantined and we can't go out, we can't go hang out with people. It's our culture is really just getting together, and when we can't do that, it's stressful. So I love that our community is starting to talk about mental health and how we can heal. So that was my spiel, but seriously, I'm so glad that we really are speaking about mental health now. So
on the mental health note, we'll go to Trina, since she's in that field.
Oh man, I feel biased, but I'm gonna shout out and give flowers to my auntie, Mama Inocento Sound Kiku, because she's someone who holds like fire / like mana really well, but also like shares that with like this very deep, like tender place in her heart for the advocacy of our peoples, like she really cares about that and does that in such a beautiful, strong, but also like tender way. She lives in Hawaii on Oahu, and she's like the auntie to the community out there and in Kohua Kalihi Valley. I'm gonna say that wrong. So yeah, I want to shout her out, but also I'm gonna shout out my Pacific Climate Warriors team too, because they're a leadership team of we're all youth, but I feel like youth is like a loose term. I feel like a youth, and I'm not gonna say how old I am, but I think just like thinking about the youth and like they're our future coming up, and so just being able to like see hope in a lot of the interests of where our youth lies, and then also just the things that they want to share and advocate for is like super huge. So I want to shout them out as well.
Thank you so much for that, Trina. Well put. Did you say give flowers to? How did you say that there's a way that you put that you were going to?
Yeah, Brandon said it as well. Just like giving them flowers.
I love that. I'm going to steal that. Brandon, you're gonna wrap this up. An hour has flown by. Naki's going to take us home after this, but you're gonna close us out with this, and you got the most time to think about it. And you don't know Nani Wilson, so you can't. You might. I say that in assuming you don't, but she's changed a lot of lives here in the Bay Area.
Yeah, I definitely have. I'm all about giving people credit where credit's due. So definitely want to. I have a list in my head. Definitely want to shout out Sue-In Lee. Sue-In Lee is one of my mentors in Philadelphia. Was really one of the first people to actually acknowledge the potential for leadership, the potential to be in these spaces and to lead, and to like speak that into existence. And so she's been just an amazing supporter. Definitely want to shout out Randy Fushima, a professor, mentor as well. He kind of spoke. He was the one who allowed me to go to grad school, encouraged me to go do that work. Definitely want to shout out our staff here at Pikawa, from the wellness navigators to the wayfinders, to the program directors, even the ones in Eastern Washington, Kiana, and Southwest Washington, Layla. The work that you folks are doing is amazing, and I'm truly inspired, and it's just been a huge blessing to be working with you folks. Definitely shouting out Joseph Saia. I know I've like elevated him a lot, but really he's an amazing leader. He's not someone who's going to talk about the work. He's out there doing the work. And so definitely want to elevate him. And then lastly, just want to shout out to my family. I would not be in the place that I am in if it wasn't for the sacrifices that my mother had made, my brother, Aaron Tacadena, and my sister, Christian Tacadena, had made. So definitely want to thank them as well for me, for putting in the work and allowing me to be where I am today. So
thank you so much for that. And
thank you so much.
Joseph is definitely one of those, don't talk about it, be about it.
Yes.
He's definitely about what he stands for. So thank you so much. This hour has flown by. I'm going to turn it over to Naki. There were some questions, you know what I mean, that I kind of had, if we don't get to this, there's some throw-in questions, never got to them. The conversation just flowed. And thank you so much for just being free and open with us.
Yes, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. Can you please mention to Joseph how nice my earrings were today?
I've heard of this rivalry.
Joseph and I have this earrings rivalry. So just mention, her earrings were kind of off the hook today. So I love Joseph. So thank you. I I appreciate the work that you guys are doing there. I appreciate the time that you guys took to speak with us and to share your story, and know that you are inspiring people, whether in Oregon or, this goes all the way to Fiji. We have people in Fiji and Marshall Islands that watch the show, but know that you are inspiring people for the work that you're doing. And I just appreciate, Carla, I appreciate the time that you took, this hour that you took to be with us. So thank you so much, Brandon and Trina, for your time. We're here every Monday at 5 p.m. Please come join us and meet the amazing people that we have every week. God bless your journey. And thank you again, Pikawa and OLI and everyone here at your team. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week.